Thank you for the opportunity to share information about our group and some of the lessons learned over the 16 years of our involvement in the fight against invasive Phragmites in our community and beyond. For those unfamiliar with Lambton Shores, it's located in Lambton County in southwestern Ontario, along the southern Lake Huron shoreline. Places you may have heard of or visited, such as Grand Bend, Pinery Provincial Park, Ipperwash, and Kettle and Stony Point First Nation, are all located within the community of Lambton Shores. Within Lambton Shores, we have numerous NC sites, areas of natural and scientific interest, and we have areas designated as provincially significant and globally rare. They include oak savanna, Carolinian core forest, coastal, meadow, marshes, and coastal dunes, as well as rare geological formations at Kettle Point and Rock Glen in Arkona. Our all-volunteer group of mostly retirees came into existence in 2009. Our group is committed to working with other organizations and private landowners to restore wetland habitat and beaches. To date, restoration work has been undertaken on over 120 hectares along the shoreline and in the watersheds in Lambton Shores. It all began when we discovered a rapidly growing, tall, grass-like plant had invaded our main beach in Port Franks. This is our chair, Nancy Vidler, standing on our beach in that grass. None of us knew at the time that we were dealing with invasive Phragmites australis, or that it was also known as European common reed, or that we would devote the next decade and a half plus controlling its spread. We quickly discovered that not a lot of folks knew what Phragmites was, including local, municipal, and conservation officials. But as we researched it, we quickly realized this was not a good plant. In fact, it was very harmful to the environment because it destroyed biodiversity and wildlife habitat, and it negatively impacted species at risk. Not to mention fire risk from highly flammable dead stalks. Frag along roadsides was concerning with its height and density obscuring drivers' views at intersections and its negative impact on drainage ditches. Completely new to us back in 2009, we discovered frag was already prevalent in Quebec, especially along the St. Lawrence watershed and along highways, and with those spread vectors that it had obviously begun moving into Ontario. We also found out it wasn't a new species. In fact, it had likely been around for millennia in Eurasia. Parts of the Great Wall of China that were built during the Han Dynasty, beginning around 200 BC, used layers of Phragmites to reinforce and stabilize it. Farmers used it for fencing, and it was the thatch in thatched roofs. Speculation has it that frag was introduced to North America via ships dumping ballast water containing seeds and viable plant parts in the Great Lakes and Atlantic Ocean ports. Frag was also used as dunnage within ships' holds, and it's thought that material disposed of on shore once cargo was unloaded likely contained viable plant parts that began to reproduce. And we found it could expand quickly and form monocultures, particularly in disturbed soil. It was especially nasty in that it released toxins from its roots that would kill surrounding native vegetation. Also that it reproduced quickly via rhizomes and stolons, and that it could achieve a density of 200 stems per square meter. It also had most of its mass below ground, and its pretty feathery seed plumes each held about 2,000 seeds, and it could grow to heights of over 5 meters. And perhaps most importantly, that it had no natural predators. We knew then that this was not a plant to be trifled with. A large part of our local economy depends on tourism, and our waterfront property owners pay a substantial amount of the property taxes collected annually in our community. Losing water access and waterfront views would have a huge negative impact. We also discovered that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada had recognized invasive Phragmites as Canada's worst invasive plant back in 2005. All of this led to our conclusion that this was not just a problem we would resolve by removing it from our local beach, but that it was a much larger community-wide problem that we confirmed by mapping all frag locations within Lambton Shores. Infestations were extensive and located on municipal, county, provincial, Crown, First Nations, and privately owned lands. Frag was no respecter of property boundaries. Once we had this information, we made presentations to our local council and to the county to make them aware of the problem and to seek their commitment to supporting us in finding solutions. They quickly came on board. Our research led us to find some folks who had already been involved in frag removal, including Dr. Janice Gilbert. Jan has been and remains an absolute godsend for our group and others like us in Ontario. She helped us begin our beach remediation. Volunteers rallied, and with proper permits in place, we hired a contractor and tackled the problem. The importance of early detection and rapid response can't be emphasized enough. For us, it meant that costs and labor at this site were considerably less than they would have otherwise been. This picture, taken in 2022, shows the dunes after remediation. Over the years, the property owners, Port Frank's Beach Homeowners Association, has become more involved in beach stewardship, including the monitoring and eradication of invasive species. For our group, having an exit plan to hand over responsibility to other established organizations and groups is essential to ensuring continuity going forward. Frag can be managed, but not eradicated. Once Jan helped us remove frag from our beach and other smaller sites in Port Frank's, we began to address the larger community-wide problem. This required a watershed approach, which we define as taking a holistic approach to managing invasive Phragmites throughout the community of Lambton Shores to prevent the reinfection of rehabilitated sites. By this time, we had developed a great relationship with our local elected officials and had obtained their financial support to complete our first invasive Phragmites management plan in 2013. The management plan identified specific PMAs requiring control, estimated control costs for each site, and prioritized sites to be tackled. Having a plan and then executing on the action plans contained therein is critical. Here's an extensive but far from exhaustive list of the ways we have connected with stakeholders and the public as we realize the great importance of reaching out to the community at large to educate and raise awareness. Public meetings, notices and tax bills, speaking presentations, online resources, social media, educational materials, pamphlets, brochures, fact sheets, door hangers, and door-to-door visits to explain our plans and answer questions was an integral part in getting support from the community. Educating the public about the loss of biodiversity due to invasive Phragmites, but that there was hope in preventing its spread, was crucial. Over the years, we have developed working partnerships and relationships with like-minded groups. As the projects grew, more partners got on board, as evidenced by the list on this slide. The support of government at all levels is also essential. All of this helps greatly in the procurement of financing through grants. Partnerships are critical to achieving success. Our largest remediation project is a 59-hectare coastal meadow marsh adjacent to a Carolinian forest at Wood Drive along Lake Huron, which had become a frag monoculture. When touring this site with Monty McNaughton, a former provincial government cabinet minister and then our local MPP, he very accurately described this area as an environmental catastrophe. We had little experience or knowledge as to how to go about finding funds for remediation, but with Jan's assistance, our first funding application to the National Wildlife Conservation Fund was successful, and we were awarded a 3-year grant. Our wood drive adventure then began. This project encompasses 5 blocks of land, as seen here, with only 2 of them having owners who were interested in controlling frag. Block 4 was owned by a church which operated it as a non-profit seasonal campground and day camp, offering affordable nature education and outdoor activities to kids aged 5 to 17. Shoreline recreation had always been an integral part of their activities, but by 2013, frag had completely taken over their beach, forcing them to post this sign. They had even gone to the expense of installing a swimming pool, as the lake no longer was available to them for recreational activities. When we approached them with our plans to help them remove frag from their beach, they were ecstatic. This began a multi-year project and was celebrated in 2018 when a volunteer appreciation barbecue and work day was held, as this flyer depicts. And as this next photo shows, we had a great turnout of local residents, seasonal campers, and even our mayor showed up. Here are some of the volunteers at work spading new frag shoots, an effective technique that kills young plants before they can grow and spread. Following several years of control effort, frag had been removed, and campers could once again resume waterfront activities. And just like the beach owners in Port Franks, who have now taken over control efforts on their beach, the church camp is managing frag on its property with little further involvement from our group. The adjacent property, Block 5, is owned by a couple who also welcomed our involvement and who have actively participated in frag removal there. They intend to maintain their property in its natural state in perpetuity through their own personal efforts and with the help of their local conservation authority. As for the other 3 blocks, it was a completely different story. Unfortunately, these lands had no readily identifiable owners, and they had no economic value as they were mostly underwater when lake levels were high. The province did not consider them crown lands and described them as orphan properties. No one was taking responsibility for controlling frag on them. This created a significant challenge for us in everything from trying to convince the ministry to issue us a letter of opinion that would allow remediation on these lands, to obtaining funding when many funding sources do not allow for work to be done on privately owned lands. It was physically challenging too. When we initially started work here, most of the frag was located on dry land, where we could legally use chemical control, which could be relatively easily applied via backpack sprayers or from vehicle-mounted spray tanks. That changed rapidly as lake levels began to increase, ultimately rising about 2 meters during the early stages of the project. This was at a time before chemical controls over water were allowed in Ontario. So our contractor, the Invasive Phragmites Control Center, had to pivot to a different control method. Most of the frag here, now well underwater, the cut to drown method was developed. Trucks or amphibious cutting machines were acquired, which could cut frag underwater at the sediment level, thus depriving the plants of the nutrients required to support growth. The biomass was moved far enough onshore that wave action would not drag it back into the lake and spread viable plant material and seeds to non-contaminated areas. This before photo shows a truck saw at work along a channel which was completely inundated with frag. This after photo shows a diverse, flourishing landscape of native plants that have evolved from the natural seed bank since the elimination of the frag monoculture along this channel. Over $1 million has been spent here, with about 75% funded through grants provided by the Canadian federal and Ontario provincial governments, along with cash and other grants and in-kind donations from environmental organizations, corporate donors, municipal government, conservation authorities, service groups, and volunteers, along with substantial in-kind donations from our contractor. The Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group has volunteered over 10,000 hours to this project to date. Did our small, grassroots, volunteer group of retirees, inexperienced in environmental matters, think for a minute back in 2009 that we could successfully take on a project of this magnitude? Not on your life. But we stuck to it, and with Dr. Gilbert's tremendous help, have reduced the frag population at this site to less than 1%. To summarize lessons learned, you need a passionate, dedicated, committed to the long-term group leading the fight. You need a plan. You need to provide education. You need buy-in from your community, residents, and officials. You need early detection and rapid response. You need resources, you need partners, and you need others to eventually take over responsibility. You may find that not everyone is on side with remediating their lands, especially at the same time. Coordinating the work to achieve the best possible outcomes is a huge task, even within a single organization. You need to break down silos where information is in one department is not shared with others. As an example, when spraying roadsides, the plant needs to be at least 1 meter in height so that herbicide is translocated to the root system. Ideally, this happens in late summer, early fall, which is also a great time for the roadside mowers to be out cutting. We've had more than one occasion when spraying was planned, only to find that roadsides were cut the previous week. Communication is key. As for resources, today there are a lot more available to land managers, informationally, operationally, and financially, in the fight against frag. And thanks to the work of the University of Toronto researchers and others, we now even have biocontrol, which will hopefully lead to gradual long-term suppression and facilitate habitat restoration. The Invasive Species Center, with its Invasive Species Action Fund, the Ontario Phragmites Action Program, with its Invasive Phragmites Control Fund, the Ontario Phragmites Working Group, the Invasive Phragmites Control Center, the Environment and Climate Change Canada Habitat Stewardship Program, Ontario's new Species Conservation Program to replace the former Species at Risk Stewardship Program Fund, are just some examples of resources available. We wish you great success as you embark on developing a comprehensive Phragmites management plan for Durham Region. Our information and resource material is available from our website to anyone interested. Here's how to reach us if we can be of help. And now, if you have any questions, Jan and I will try to answer them.